I call this meeting to order. Can we have our announcements, please?
Before we begin the agenda, the Wichita-Sedgwick County Metropolitan Area Planning Commission and the Wichita-Sedgwick County Board of Zoning Appeals would like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone to this public hearing. Copies of the agenda for today's meeting, the public hearing procedure, and Planning Department staff reports on all agenda items are available in the lobby of this conference room. The Planning Commission's and the BZA's bylaws limit the applicant on a zoning, subdivision, or variance application and his or her representative to a total of 10 minutes of speaking time at the start of the hearing on that item, plus up to 2 minutes at the conclusion of that hearing. All other persons wishing to speak on agenda items are limited to 3 minutes per person. However, if they feel that it is needed and justified, the chairman may extend these times by up to 2 minutes. All speakers are requested to state his or her name and address for the record when beginning to speak. When you are finished speaking, please write your name, address, and the case number on the sheet provided in the lobby. This will enable staff to notify you if there are any additional proceedings concerning that item. Please note that all written and visual materials you present to the Commission and the Board will be retained by the Secretary as part of the official record. If you are not speaking but you wish to be notified about future proceedings on a particular case, please sign in on that same sheet. The Planning Commission and the Board are interested in hearing the views of all persons who wish to express themselves on the agenda items. However, we ask that all speakers please be as concise as possible and avoid long repetitions of facts or opinions which have already been stated. For your information, the Wichita City Council has adopted a policy for all city zoning items. A copy of this policy is available in the lobby. The City Council relies on a written record of the Planning Commission hearings and does not conduct its own additional public hearings on these items. The decision of the BZA is final. Any appeal of a decision of the BZA is to district court.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to the February 1st meeting of the Metropolitan Planning Commission and the Board of Zoning Appeals. If it's okay with the Commission, I would like to suggest that we do the BZA first, since on the January 18th, we deferred the item and brought it back date specific today. Do I see an objection? Seeing none, we will start with the BZA 2017 00058 case, and we'd have staff presentation by David Urett. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, would you want to go through the MAPC agenda to take
good
care
idea.
of some of the...
In case anybody wants to leave after that. Before we start the BZA meeting, let's turn to our agenda. Item 2-1, one-step final plat, 2018 quadruple 01. Anybody wish to hear that on the commission? Seeing none. Anyone in the audience wish to hear the one-step final plat for the University Gardens 3rd edition? See anybody's hand? Seeing none, we'll take that by consent. Item 2-2, subdivision case 2018 quadruple 02, one-step final plat for the Trinity Auto Service edition. Anybody in the commission wish to hear that one? Anyone in the audience wish to hear that case? Okay, we'll take that on consent. Do we have a motion?
Moved. Second.
Moved by Mr. Green, second by Ms. Miles. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
And then I have one other consent item I'd like to take at this time. Case number 10. It's a motion to set public hearing for the Delano Neighborhood Plan. Anybody?
Mr. Chairman, you might just go through all of them and see if there's any others.
Okay, let me take this one first.
Okay.
Since shouldn't be any problem with this one.
We need to state that, with what the date of it is, so.
Move that we take the recommended action to have the meeting on March 8th.
Second. Do we have a second from Mr. Green? Mr. Klausmeyer, any discussion? Seeing none, we'll set that for a public hearing on March 8th? Okay, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, let's go back to case number 4, which is CUP 2017-00050. Anybody on the commission like to hear that? We will hear that one. Number 5, 2017-00042, conditional use of an auto sales and limited zoning, commercial zoning. Anybody wish to hear that one?
In the backup, is that the one that's suggested to be denied?
Yes.
So I don't understand why the denial, I would like to better understand that, so I'd like to hear that
You'd
one.
like to hear that one? Okay. Moving on, case number 6, number 2017-00043. Anybody on the commission wish to hear that one? Okay, anyone in the audience wish to hear 2017-00043? And then we'll take that by consent. Okay, case number 7, 2017-00045, city conditional use for a 75-foot tall wireless communication facility. Anybody in the commission wish to hear that one? Anyone in the audience would like to hear that? Can I see a hand if anybody wants? Okay, we'll take that by consent. Number 8, case number 2017-00046, also a conditional use for a 75-foot wireless communication facility.
I have a staff question on that item.
A,
That's what just
Hmm?
I think we just ought to hear it.
we'll hear that one. Number 9, zoning case 2017-00058 and a CUP 2017-00056. Anybody in the commission wish to hear that one? So we'll hear that one. So we have 2 by consent, 6 and 7.
Move to approve items 6 and 7.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Warren, seconded by Mr. Bill Johnson. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. All right, now we'll go back to the Board of Zoning Appeals agenda. We have one item, BZA 2017-00058, which is deferred from the January 18th meeting. And Mr. Miller, are you presenting that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Dale Miller for the planning staff. This is a request for a variance to reduce the number of required off-street parking spaces from 38 to 26 on the property that's outlined in blue on the slide with the arrow pointing to it at the southeast corner of Vassar and East Central. This is an older aerial, shows it when it was vacant as a unused parking lot. If you go by now, and you'll see with the slides, there's a building under construction on this location. To the west is a bank. To the north, across Central, there's an apartment complex, and then there's some office buildings and some more apartments or residents of some sort that appear to support things going on at Wesley Hospital, which is over here. To the east is a dental office, and then further down on the east side are single-family homes that all front Clifton Avenue. And then to the south are more single-family homes that front Vassar. This is the current site plan that is submitted as part of their building plan package. It shows the improvements to the median on Central. It also shows the proposed retail building on the southern portion of the building. There's an access point to Central, and then two to Vassar on the west side. The parking spaces are shown on the site, and then they have obtained 5 additional spaces from the bank, from Entrust Bank, across Vassar to the west. This is the building under construction. I think these photos are possibly 2 weeks old. This is looking at the apartment project to the north across East Central. Another shot of the same apartment complex looking east on Central. These are the homes that front Clifton to the east. The dentist office is here, a little hard to see right now. There's a better shot of the dental office. And this is looking from the dental office west, what I believe to be our employee parking back at the subject site. And this is looking down Vassar. You can see here there is a no parking sign which is goes all the way from Central to 3rd Street on the west side of Vassar. The east side of Vassar, which when I wrote the staff report, had mistakenly thought that they had just put up 2-hour parking limits on the east side from 9 to 4. However, in talking with the traffic engineer, he showed me Google Earth's Google Street views from 2007 and 2012, I believe, that showed 2-hour parking limits. So as many times as I was out there looking at it, apparently I never read the signs on the east side well enough to know. That's looking west at the bank, and the spaces that would be right in here, the 5 spaces that they've obtained from the bank. The drive approach is here, and northwest back towards Wesley. This was the original site plan, and I'm not going to go through all these because I think there are 5 or 6 different site plans. But this, the zoning to rezone this to a more intense use has been going on for a number of years, and there have been site plans submitted with some of the applications because they were zone changes. There was not a requirement for there to be a site plan. Some of them were site plans as a way to try and explain what was going on. One of the issues that happened was, as you can see here from this original site plan, they had planned to close this existing driveway and utilize a joint driveway between the dental property to the east and the proposed new building. And in fact, one of the conditions was that they had to get a joint access agreement to allow for this to happen from the original application. However, as this progressed, the traffic engineer indicated that this location here is too close to the median and to the traffic signal that controls the left turn going further north, and required them to leave the Central Avenue driveway open, which cost them at least 3 spaces on site. Staff is recommending approval of the request. This is the last vacant, undeveloped property in the segment between Hillside and Oliver. It's an infill site, obviously, which makes it more difficult to deal with. It's relatively small. Given its location, it's on East Central, which carries over 18,000 vehicle trips a day just to the east. I forgot to look at the total, but just going east, there are 18,016 vehicles on an average day on that portion of East Central. Vassar is a local residential street, and as the neighbors have indicated in previous conversations, because it is a local street and there is parking on one side of the street, that it's sometimes difficult to get through, and they're concerned that this particular activity will congest Vassar more than it already is. The hardship that staff sees that the applicant has is with the 26 spaces that he has, there. 21 of them are for his use. Part of the reason why we asked for it to be deferred last meeting was that we had found out that there was an agreement, a private agreement, to allow 5 of these spaces to be used by the dentist. And so that reduced the number of spaces that were available on site, but he picked up the 5 across the street, so he still has 26, which are sufficient to serve the proposed restaurant that will go in on roughly the eastern third of the proposed building. So he has enough parking spaces to open the restaurant. However, he does not have enough parking or any parking to serve the remainder of the space. And so, and because the variance, in order to get what he needs to go from the (38 spaces to 26), that's a 32% reduction, which is more than staff can grant by an administrative adjustment. And so that's why he is required to file the variance, because staff can't address this administratively. And so we're here at the board to have you consider this application. Staff feels that it's in the public interest of the community to approve this request. Like I said, it's the last vacant lot in that mile segment, and denial of the request would result in increased pressure, potentially to obtain more land in the immediate area, which could potentially result in the demolition of residential structures, which staff doesn't believe is going to benefit the College Hill neighborhood any. In the spirit and intent, in the staff report, there are 2 variances that have been granted previously, one for a 50% reduction and another one for a 100% reduction for a pizza restaurant that was able to find parking across the street in a previous case. And so this reduction of 34% is not excessive, or 32% is not excessive compared to some of the others that have been granted. I believe the applicant is here and would be able to address specific questions. With that, turn it over to the board.
Green.
Yeah, Mr. Miller, on the, there are 5 parking spaces that are on the applicant's lot that are going to be used by the dentist office, is that correct? That agreement?
Yes.
What prompted that agreement? Was it because of the cross-lot access that took away parking
Yes,
spaces?
the original requirement, the original proposal, when this case went through back in 2012, was that they were going to use that same driveway, which I'm having trouble getting this thing to work. There. They were going to use the driveway that is on the dental property to the east and come in then swoop around, and then go back out. However, for whatever reason, they didn't get a decision, didn't ask, whatever it was, until fairly late in the process, that action wasn't going to work because of its proximity to the median and the signal light that's already there. And so that forced them to leave this one open. And I believe they got the agreement with the property owner to the east, because that was what they originally had in mind, and in order to make that work, they must have had to give up the 5 spaces, but the agent can explain that in better detail, but that's just my summary.
So there's just one drive now for those 2 properties?
Well, no, there will be 2 drives. There will be this drive off of Central to the subject property, and then the dentist will be able to maintain that drive as well. They'll both be there, is my understanding.
Okay, well, maybe the agent can explain why he has to give up 5 of his parking stalls then.
I'll let him speak to that.
Mr. Johnson, you have a question for the presenter?
Dale, is there a way to close that drive that's off the dentist where he's got access to that other drive and gain them his parking spaces?
We have the traffic engineer here, and I would let him defer to the decision-making on how they got there whenever that's appropriate.
Thank you.
Do you want that now, or do you want to wait till after the
I can wait.
applicant? Okay. Ms. Vaughn? Sorry.
So, I'm curious, even though the may be agreements in a place currently for parking at other buildings, what happens if in the future those buildings are sold to somebody else and those parking agreements are no longer in place?
I'll let the applicant speak to it, but in reviewing those, I believe they run with the land for the time limit that they are allotted.
Mr. Foster first, and then Mr. Daly.
Bill, I just had a couple, not really questions, just I think some updates of the 5 criteria in the staff report for the request. First one is under adjacent property. It states the PO requires screening and landscape buffering, which should minimize impact on nearby properties. However, if you look in the staff report, that's been waived by administrative adjustments, so that's an incorrect statement there. Then if you go on down further, it states a masonry wall is required along the south property line. As I understand from administrative adjustment, that's been switched to a wood fence, so that would be an update.
Both of those statements are incorrect.
Then another one would be if you look under the spirit and intent criteria, it states a 32% reduction of 12 spaces is not an excessive request. If you do the math on all those administrative adjustments to parking, the range is 13.4% to 24.7%. So I would not agree that the 12 spaces, I think it is an excessive request because that does not meet these administrative adjustments given. I think the report should be updated with that information.
Well, the report clearly states that there were administrative adjustments, which we are limited to 25%, and that's the majority of the requests that were outlined there in the first part of the paragraph. Then it says 2 variances have been approved, so the staff report clarifies the distinction between a administrative adjustment and a variance. And the 2 that I referenced, the 50%, were both variances. I was just showing that administratively we can adjust the number of spaces. We've adjusted those total numbers much larger than what's requested. Now clearly they're more than the 25%. There's no argument about that. I was just trying to show the range of numbers that have been granted. On the screening, they are required to have the masonry wall along the south. They are required to have a landscape buffer. It's doesn't have to meet code. Then on the east, they're required to have the wooden fence, and they are required to double up on the number of trees, 1 per 20 feet instead of the 1 per 40, for clarification purposes.
You mentioned that the 26 is okay for the restaurant, but is there anything in this that if they do have occupants come into the rest of the building, they have to acquire other spaces, or we're just giving them carte blanche of, that's it?
If the variance is approved, then they would only have to have 26 spaces for the entire occupancy of the building. And 21 of them would be required to be on site.
Any other questions for the presenter? Okay, thank you, Dale. Would the agent or applicant come forward? And they have, you have 10 minutes. State your name and address, please.
Yeah, thank you. Paul Gray, I'm the agent, I'm the agent for the applicant. My address is 2024 North Woodlawn, Suite 200, Wichita. I'm here representing the applicant for this project, and I would like to thank you for the consideration of our request. As you all know, we've been before this board for an item as it related to the original zoning and CUP and protective overlay. So some of you are familiar with this project, and we have a glut of information that we're happy to provide you. So I'm more than happy to answer a lot of questions that may be specifically pointed to things that are of interest. But one of the things I wanted to note, just in reference to the prior questions, originally when we first came before the MAPC and into the city, we did have a location of the entrance to the property that straddled the property line between our Vassar site and the site for the doctor's or the dentist's office next door. In that arrangement, we had to reposition the dentist parking spaces up against this building, which created a net loss of parking for him at that time. And through that negotiating process, it was agreed to allow him to have usage of 5 spaces on the building that we have under construction. And so during that was where the 5 spaces came from. It was to offset the loss that was created of having that access. But during the process of actual final design and permitting, at the suggestion of somebody on the MAPC, it was requested that we try to figure out how to use access on Central that takes advantage of the light, and that was something that the city engineering department agreed with. So through that turn of events, it changed our need from moving the entrance onto Central at the shared point between the two properties and moved it further east so that it could take advantage of the signalization. Through that process, we had more discussions and about parking, and then during that time we obtained a tenant, a restaurant tenant, and that's where the overall parking quantity came into question. So through that entire discussion, we worked with city staff trying to figure out how many parking stalls we needed. At the time, we went out and we sought 5 additional spaces from Interest Bank, which they're allowing us to use under agreement. But through this entire process, all that did was offset the 5 we let the dentist use. So we have 26 physical spaces on our property at this time, and 5 that we can use next door at Interest, and the loss of 5 on ours for the dentist. Well, as this project evolved from the original concept of sharing a parking lot, now that we do not have to share a parking lot, we have our own entrance onto Central, and the dentist currently has his own entrance. We've gone back to the dentist and talked about, is there really a need anymore to combine the 2 parking lots? And at this point in time, we do not need to. We've reviewed the site plan with staff, and that's the site plan you see here that eliminates the cross-access point between the doctor's parking lot and ours. The doctor never really wanted to have to split a parking lot and a drive, but he tried to do so out of being a good neighbor. But now that we've eliminated this drive between the doctor's parking lot and our parking lot, it restores his ability to have all of his parking spaces. And we are currently in the process of trying to unwind that agreement that has 5 spaces of ours dedicated to the doctor. That is a legal process that'll take a little bit of a time because it was a filed document with the county court, but we are trying to unwind that so we can actually have our 5 spaces back. Mr. Green?
So then that would give you a total of 31 spaces because you'll maintain the
Yes.
5 over at Intrust?
Yes.
And is there a possibility of getting more from Intrust? Have you pursued that if it's needed?
If it's needed, we have the opportunity to go and ask for it. But this is one of those situations where, because this is a unique project, I mean, this is one of the oldest neighborhoods in town, the only vacant site anywhere in the area that can be built on. It has its own dynamics. And as you've seen just in the way the site plan has changed and evolved, and each time has continually gotten better, we think it's beneficial to see what our ultimate need is. One thing, there's this assumption that we're going to fill up this parking lot continuously. Everybody talks, you know, there was a lot of conversation out there in the media. There were letters written to the city council. There's letters written to you. There was people on Facebook. The Cake News did something, the Wichita Eagle. And the concern that continuously gets cited is Clifton Square. Everybody's concerned, don't let this become another Clifton Square. Well, this is nothing like Clifton Square. I've spent some time, me and my staff have traveled around the various different restaurants of this brand throughout the city of Wichita at lunch and dinner on random days. And we've also gone and visited Clifton Square at similar times. A couple of dynamics between Clifton Square and our property is Clifton Square has 58 parking stalls in their parking lot. They have 22,000 square feet of space available for lease, 3 restaurants, 2 entertainment venues, and 8 businesses. So a total of 13 tenants in this facility and 58 spaces splitting that up. Additionally, all of their restaurants are sit-down restaurants. None of them have drive-through access. So everybody that goes to Clifton Square to eat or to enjoy the services of the businesses there have no choice but to park and stay. Our site has 26 spaces, which is just slightly less than half of what Clifton Square is. And I'm just talking about the physical ones without attributing the doctors and interest banks, but 26 parking spaces is only slightly less than half of Clifton Square, but we have just a little over 6,000 square feet. We're less than a third of the size of Clifton Square. And our restaurant, which is the entity that is causing the most concern, has a drive-through window. And that drive-through window bleeds off 40 to 50% of the restaurant's business that you don't have at a sit-down restaurant. So while I understand the neighbors' concerns of this, not wanting this to be a Clifton Square, with that said, everybody loves Clifton Square. I mean, it's part of what makes College Hill what College Hill is. But I can understand the neighbors' concerns who have a hard time parking in their driveways and driving up and down the street. But I don't believe it's a fair comparison. I think our traffic will be considerably less than what they see there. I know that I'm probably approaching my time, but if I'm answering questions from the
Hey,
board,
just a
let's
second.
extend.
Point of order here. I see the clock is running, but I think most of that comment was answering a question by Mr. Green, which I don't think should count towards your presentation time.
Thank you.
So
Yeah, may I resume?
I would say you have 5 minutes left.
Thank you. Okay, but to conclude on that point, during the past several weeks, we've driven by Hog Wild, which is the restaurant that we're building at the site. And we've gone by at lunch, and we've gone by in the evenings. And bear in mind, this is the smallest restaurant in that entire chain, and of all of their restaurants nationwide that they have. So the number of seats we have in the restaurant is less than any of the other restaurants we went to. Our average usage during lunch and evenings And lunch has more traffic than the evenings. There's between 8 and 10 cars attributed to patrons of the restaurant on average, 6 cars to 8 cars for the staff, and then 2 cars for catering. So the most we've encountered in all of our studies are 20 cars at any one of these hog wiles, and that's over 5-day spreads on random days for the past 3 weeks. We started this before we had our original BZA hearing. And during those same times, we drive by Clifton Square to check it out, and Clifton Square is completely full. So I don't want somebody considering, well, it was cold that day. Well, it was cold that day, and Clifton Square was completely full. So we try to encounter that. So what we're contending is we have 26 spaces available to us today. When we unwind our agreement with the doctor, we will have 31 spaces available to us. Our belief is the restaurant will not take anywhere near that capacity, and there will be sufficient cars for the businesses that we will have in the remaining portion of the building. And if at that time in the future, we deem that it's necessary to get additional cars, as being good managers of property, we'll go out and we'll seek additional parking spaces from our partners around us and our neighbors around us. But to arbitrarily dictate that we need to do that today when we don't have a full assessment of the demand will make it incredibly challenging for us to move forward in filling those tenant spaces there. Because as of now, I have enough on paper to be sufficient for the restaurant. But until I have the ability to go out and utilize the building, it'll make it challenging to really ascertain what the need is. So with that, I stand for any other questions. I hope I sufficiently answered the ones that came up over why we have an agreement with the dentist and the fact that we're unwinding that agreement because we didn't no longer have cross-lot access between the two properties.
Any other questions from?
Yes, ma'am.
So what is the length of the agreements that you have for parking?
My agreement with Intrust Bank is a licensing agreement. We have a license to utilize their parking spaces for so many years at a rental rate, which can continuously be renewed in the future. So
How many years is that currently?
right now it's for 3 years.
And then
It,
I'm curious, will those parking spots at Intrust be labeled in some way? I'm just curious whether people will, they like to park as close as they can, whether they'll park on the street as opposed to walking across the street to park at Intrust, unless that's specifically labeled or.
we will not label the parking at Intrust because I don't think that would add value because somebody would already have taken the decision that they were going to park an Intrust parking lot. We can label the parking in our building and direct traffic that overflow traffic is to be placed over in that parking lot. That's how you would direct traffic. It would be the people that would come into our restaurant and center, and they would be directed over if they need additional parking. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Mr. Richardson.
Mr. Graywood, is there a way that you could encourage your tenants to have their employees park at Intrust? I mean, it seems to me that'd be a better way to do this. However, having them leave in the middle of the shift and move their cars may not be, because the Intrust parking is only available after hours for Intrust. And so I'm not, but it looks to me like employee parking would work better if you could. Is that what you have in mind, really?
Well, from our analysis of other facilities and talking to the owners of the restaurant, we don't believe there's going to be excessive demand on the parking lot at all. We don't believe that we're going to be exceeding the parking stalls we already have. So that's why we're here today, is we're trying to guess at what the future scenario looks like. And our contention and that of the staff is that in infill projects around the community, it's not unusual to have parking reductions. All of downtown, for instance, the downtown core of Wichita doesn't even have parking requirements. Everybody's expected to park on off-site parking and in streets. This is not downtown, and we do not want everybody parking on the streets, but because it is an infill project and an older community, we're trying to adhere as closely as we can to the requirements, but at the same time, recognize that those requirements are not always completely accurate. I'll give you an example. At 21st and Webb Road, we're developing some property in Tallgrass, and the adjacent project right next to us, and this is out in, I guess you can call it infill today, but it was the suburbs. There's a 50% parking reduction on the properties at 21st and Webb Road. And so that, it's not completely unusual to have a variance that analyzes the peaks and ebbs and flows of the demand on the different types of businesses in an area and how that affects the parking structure and what the real parking needs are. So whether it ultimately becomes employees that park across the street, at this time we are of the opinion that we don't think we'll fill the parking lot completely, because just based off of car counts and other parking or other malls. And for analysis, we've used the Hog Wow restaurant at West Street, K96 in Woodlawn, and Harry and Rock Road. So we try to get a diverse group of their locations to see what their daily lunch traffic was in relationship to their evening traffic. And bear in mind, these peak traffics, those times center around lunchtime. It's only for about a 2-hour period, and even then, those parking lots have less cars in them than what our total parking count is in our parking lot.
Any other questions? Mr. Daly?
So if it doesn't happen to what you expect that there wouldn't fill, would you be willing to have a condition on this that if at any time that it caused a problem or it was evident that you needed, you would either come back to the planning department or to the BZA and get it realigned and say, we're going to get more, or you're going to be shut down?
Legal, is that even feasible?
Personally, I don't know how you would determine, it would be so subjective as to what would be a condition to require them to come back. I don't think you could do that.
So if they're parking on somebody else's lot that they shouldn't be, and that those people, like if interest, if they took over 10 places and interest says, we don't want you there, and they could report it, and
Put away.
then it could be reconsidered that they didn't uphold, and he's guessing, he's making estimates by looking other places instead of that place.
Mr. Bill Johnson?
This question's for Dale or staff. Dale, if the applicant goes back and gets the 5 spaces back from the dentist, that'll give him 31 spaces, then this could be administrative adjustment versus,
That's correct, yes.
right? Okay, I just need to know that. Thank you.
Klosmeyer?
Paul?
Thank you for waiting.
Paul, I was curious, how did the dentist lose 5 parking spots? What caused that?
The dentist did not lose a net 5 parking spots when we reconfigured the parking lot. He did lose some parking spaces. It was more out of, at the time, This was early in the spring when they were making this agreement with the dentist, and the dentist attorneys and the attorneys of the landowners were making this agreement. It was a consideration of the dentist being inconvenienced, is what it came down to. The dentist didn't really want to make a change to his parking lot. The dentist was satisfied with his property the way it was, and I believe it was part of the agreement between the dentist. In addition, the dentist had asked for some other things to be, some improvements to be made onto his property. All of those, I believe, were consideration of the dentist agreeing to grant this access.
You bought some property from him for this? I mean,
We did not. There was no exchange of property. When I say consideration, the dentist had no, there was nothing forcing the dentist to make an agreement with the property owners to split his property with a driveway on the property line, because that driveway that was originally proposed to be there was half on his property and half on this property. And consideration to get him to make a decision that he was not bound to make, he was given the use of 5 parking spaces. At that time, and even through this whole process, no one ever considered that that was going to be a detriment to the project. And now that we've closed that gap up and the dentist is able to keep his parking the same, we're working with the dentist now to try and unwind that agreement that gets those parking spaces back.
I think, Mr. Gray, what you're saying is that this was all about consideration because he actually gained parking spaces by splitting the entry with you.
A net gain, yes.
Yeah.
he's over the limit anyway, the way it looks.
So I think we had a clarification by Mr. Miller.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up with Mr. Johnson's question. From a procedural standpoint, if he was able to get the additional spaces and go to an administrative adjustment, anyone that felt they were impacted, aggrieved is the word used in the code, could file an appeal, which would then bring it back to the Board of Zoning Appeals for the board to decide whether staff had appropriately used the administrative adjustment procedures. And so that was part of the reason why the variance route, once the numbers seemed to make sense, that way this thing finally comes to an end one way or another.
Mr. Miller, since you're up at the podium, could you respond to Mr. Daly's question about what he was suggesting that we ask the attorney? Do you have any opinion on that?
I don't see a practical way on how to implement that.
Well, if a neighbor complained, they're blocking my driveway, parking to that restaurant is blocking my driveway. Something like that is what that they, okay, you aggrieved, if you have an agreement from a neighbor.
Brian can speak to that better than I can, but that's different than a zoning violation.
911 if there's blocking a driveway.
Good afternoon, Brian Kuhn. I'm the city traffic engineer for the city of Wichita. My address is 455 North Main. Currently, we have ordinances in effect that it actually criminalizes blocking people's driveways. If you park within 8 foot of the street line extension of a driveway, that car can be cited and towed. So we already have a way to address that. The probably bigger concern is legal parking that would extend down Vassar. One of the reasons that the signal was used rather than closing that and sharing the driveway is that this should push almost all of the traffic along Central coming in and out rather than using Vassar, which would be illogical to use. So we should see an actual, for this size of development, we should actually see most of the traffic staying on Central, and that was the purpose.
On the 8 feet, clear me up on that. 8 feet from what?
8 feet from the straight line extension of the driveway. So as you can imagine, right up on the board, right here, these are the straight lines, and then you send those up to Central, extend those, and then 8 feet beyond that in each direction. So
Well, yeah.
There we go.
There may be an ordinance against that, and could be towed, but we know it isn't enforced. I can see that.
Yeah, WPD vigorously enforces the driveways. If driveways are blocked, WPD will come and cite that. That's actually much more priority than just a violation of a 2-hour no parking zone.
Okay, somebody had a question for the traffic engineer before, and I asked him if they could wait. Who was that?
I was just curious, when you were looking at this, if the dentists were involved in any of this discussion, why that approach that's on both pieces of property couldn't be closed, where all their traffic would go out to the drive that would be on the applicant's property, and have additional parking, which would even control that parking more so than it is the way it's going to end up being if it's approved.
I apologize, I didn't hear all of that.
I think what he was asking was would it be possible to close that entrance and add more parking?
If you want to move to a joint approach,
No, just closing the approach.
that would probably be, and I have to consult with city law, but my understanding, that would probably be a taking.
What do you mean?
And I mean, the reason I even ask it, in the event that this applicant was dealing with the dentist, if that's something that could be agreed upon.
The dentist property is not part of the application, and so it would be, I don't know how you could put a condition on the dental property saying, in order to make this site work, you have to close your driveway. And that would be a taking because he has the
I think what
right.
Mr. Johnson was saying was it'd be a consideration that Mr. Gray could go back to the dentist and
That's
and
all it
use
is. It's not that we're going to request that. I just wondered why that maybe wasn't looked at.
The problem that we encounter right now with the dentist's office is their property line is along literally right at the north side of their building. So the current plan will actually take away a couple stalls here, maybe two, maybe one, bring this straight, and then have it come back up. So they're already going to lose a couple stalls here. They would be regained if we close that entrance. There'd be able to be one or maybe two more installed there, but there is just not enough room. And that also provides that address entry on, but we already have one. So I think it's actually doable to remove it. Just, it would be a relatively large inconvenience for the dentist, the orthodontist.
I can answer that as well.
Brian, before you leave there, so what you're saying is, I'm looking here at my Google Maps, and it looks like the dentist has at least 2, maybe 4 spaces that he's parking on city property?
That's correct. We were actually unaware of where the property line was, and as this project came before us, we recognized that they do not have a use of right-of-way permit for those 4 stalls, and that's something we'll be addressing administratively.
Thank you.
Mr. Foster.
If I could, I'd like to respond to the question about going back to the dentist and closing his access. We researched that option and actually designed a scenario, one of the site plans that we did. There's actually a greater reduction. By the time you get in and you have all the cars turning, there's even less parking stalls available between the 2 combined parking properties to do that. And you have a gentleman who really just as soon everybody leave him alone.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Mr. Foster.
Brian, if you would clarify, Where are we at right now in terms of this application? Is it going to have cross-lot access or not?
Currently, it will not. And there's, the way the dentist parking is aligned, in order to get cross-lot access, they would probably lose 3 stalls.
Okay, so the way it stands now, what we're considering, there's no cross-lot access. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Richards.
Well, it's a question, I'm sorry, a question for Paul, but unless we're through with.
Yes, sir.
Paul, do you feel comfortable enough about unwinding this agreement to make it conditional on the approval here, that you can get that unwound? I think that solves a lot of questions, says you'll get 5 spaces back and not have to worry about the interest.
Well, there's two things to consider. One, do I feel comfortable that we can unwind the agreement with the dentist? Yes. Secondly, as far as making the board's decision, obviously the board being an independent body can take and choose whatever action it wants. But if I unwind the agreement with the dentist, there essentially is no need for board action, because that would move us from a 31% reduction to an 18% reduction that could be done administratively. So that's kind of why we're here asking for the board's approval for the 31, because at some point in time, if I unwind I'm not saying that this is our intention. If we were to unwind the dentist agreement, get us back to our original whole 21 or 26 physical parking spaces on our property, and we, at some point in time, deemed it unnecessary to continue to use interest banks parking because we did not have demand, that would trigger and force us at a later date to come back and either change an administrative adjustment or come back and change a BZA variance, because 31 spaces gives us an 18% reduction. If I lose interest banks, it moves me back to 26, which again then would put me back to needing a 31% adjustment. So if I made it contingent on that, there's multiple scenarios where in the future I could find myself in default of the agreement that the city or MAPC or whichever the body is that provides me in one route or the other. So we're trying to make sure we don't want to create additional future problems is our goal through this. But to take that just one step further, somebody had asked me the question of, could we go back to interest and ask for more spaces, or could we go across the street and ask for more spaces? As a good property owner who has a good reputation across town, we own properties in every corner of Wichita, including Delano, downtown, Old Town, Northeast, Northwest, South Wichita, all throughout the city. We've got a good reputation of taking care of our properties. If we find that there is additional need in the future for parking, we would at that time go and seek alternate agreements with our neighboring properties to see if we could get additional parking. But I don't want to arbitrarily do that, and that's why I'm trying to ask for the proper channels, because I could have asked for interest to give us 10 more spaces and gone the administrative adjustment route at this time, but I thought it was better to get the board's input and influence on this decision.
Okay, seeing no more questions for the applicant. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Gray. Now we'll go to the public. Anybody in attendance like to speak on this item? You want me to ask that? Just out of curiosity, it's been mentioned by one of our board members, how many people intend to speak? At least 2. Let's start. 3. Let's start. Please state your name and address, and you have 3 minutes.
Yes, sir. Trish Heilman. I'm at 139 South Fountain in College Hill. A lot of new information here today, so this has been educational and things that I didn't know even yesterday. Unfortunately, I could have prepared differently if I had known. Some of the things that I heard that were interesting is Paul talked about the employees at the restaurant. he is very sure that they're going to have plenty of parking. And I wish I was as sure in him as he is. So we have seen time and time again in College Hill where businesses don't have enough parking and it affects our neighbors. And it's not just Clifton Square. It's the Wine Dive. The Wine Dive started very small and then grew and grew as a restaurant. And now we've got people parking from the restaurant all up our neighbors' yards, and I hear about it. I just got an email from a gentleman who moved into College Hill just over a year ago. A while back, Dempsey's Biscuit Company opened up and brought great business. See, we love our businesses. He loves the restaurant, everything about it. He does have a problem with their employees parking on our street. The street of Oaklawn Avenue has been taken over by the employees. 8 feet, we're supposed to park from driveways. If you go down a College Hill street, there aren't many spaces 8 feet, between driveways. So it is difficult to legally park a car on a College Hill street, but people still do it quite a bit. So what we're asking for as a neighborhood is please take these issues, what we foresee as a potential issue of not enough parking here and people choosing to park, especially employees, up our neighborhood streets, and asking for the BZA to say, Paul, please get parking north of Central. Why I don't like the Intrust spot is that's only Saturday and Sunday. Intrust only is allowing Paul to use their spots after their business hours. They can't leave their building until their parking lot is clear. So they can't let anybody park there until after 6:30 at night, Monday through Friday. It's worthless to the employees or the people who are dining there Monday through Friday. It's only a Saturday, Sunday solution. We'd like to live in our houses all 7 days of the year. So that's one big thing. We'd like full-time parking to be made available. And honestly, we fully concede that if Paul's right, and after a year, after 2 years, and we see the traffic, because it's not just Hog Wild, it's 3 more businesses with probably 2 employees each. That's six employees at Hog Wild is what Paul stated. That's 12 employees taking up 26 spots that I just found it, got back from the dentist. Woohoo! So, I can't see my time. I don't know. I'm finishing
Your
up.
time is up. Do you need more time?
We'll
start with another minute.
Thank you, sir. I'll try not to ramble. So it's 12 employee spots, 26 total. That's 14 spots for people who attend the restaurant, and then 2 catering spots. What you see is it's not just easy peasy. There's going to be plenty of parking. We're concerned, and we have, I think, a justifiable reason because we've seen it happen time and time again. Here we're talking about a new development, not Dempsey's Biscuit Company, the building's been there forever, the parking's been there forever, and now it gets popular, Clifton Square. We can't do anything about those things, or I wish we could. Here, we've got a new development. We've got the opportunity to set things up correctly. Let's please ask this developer to make it right for the neighborhood and to obtain parking north of Central for his employees so that customers can use that lot and not park up, the employees parking up in our neighborhood. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for me? Yes, sir.
Mr. Blick.
Can you show me on the map, are you one of the adjacent property owners? Are you on that map right there?
I'm not. I'm the College Hill Association president.
Oh, okay.
Some of our adjacent property owners, actually the flu has hit most of our people that came to the February or January 18th meeting. We've got, and I've got letters from them. I've got next door posts, printouts. This is a lot of neighbors, it's not just me, are very concerned about the parking in this lot, that it's not sufficient. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
Hi, good afternoon. Monica Sissel. My address is 352 North Vassar Street. I live on the corner of 3rd and Vassar. So we already get traffic from people coming down 3rd Street to go to Walgreens and Panera, which we love Walgreens and Panera there, but traffic is a real issue in that neighborhood. Despite the small, narrow street, brick streets. Most of our homes on that street has single car garages. And so for those of us who have teenagers that drive or more than one adult in the home, most of us do park our cars on the street. So that's hindering the drive-through on Vassar. When two cars come down the road, it's also going to be problematic if we do have additional parking that is down toward Central on Vassar. And ma'am, I appreciate your suggestion of encouraging the employees to park in the interest lot, because one of the problems with that option is that on Vassar Street, you can only turn right onto Central. So if someone does want to go to the restaurant, which is in this development, they will have already passed Vassar Street and passed Interest. So if they see, once they pull in the drive on Central, that there's no parking in that lot, they actually have to leave the lot, go around the block, which you know where they're going to go. They're going to drive on Clifton. They're going to come down 3rd Street. They're going to come back out on Route 10 and then have to go into that interest lot if they see that there is space in the lot or know that there's space in that lot. So that will increase some of the traffic on those narrow and already congested streets. That was my main point I wanted to make. And I do think that the lot at Interest, people will not likely park there unless possibly employees use it, because they do have to cross the street, cross the grass, cross the sidewalk, cross the street to get to the lot. We know we all like our conveniences, and that is not convenient. So employees would be an excellent suggestion. However, it doesn't sound like that's a great option because of the time, the day requirements.
Mr. Blick.
You're on this map also. Do you know
Yes.
where are you located at?
Please use the mouse.
Okay, let me see here. Vassar, is that 3rd Street? Somebody confirm that? Yeah. So this is us.
Like to see a business, but you're just more concerned about the parking?
I do believe that is one of our main concerns. Early on, when we discussed the option, we actually talked about putting a dead end down at the Central and Vassar opening. Certainly, we all love Dempsey's and Ziggy's and the walkability of our neighborhood, and love to see more of that. So definitely, I don't eat meat, so opportunity of having hog wild down the street doesn't really thrill me. But yes, I think that everybody is open to that now that development has changed. Yeah.
Other questions for the speaker? Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much.
Next speaker, please.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Maxine Bostic, and I represent Wichita Independent Neighborhood. My address is 4601 Vesta Drive, 67208. And thanks for letting me speak. James, our president, is sick today. He sent me, and we are really concerned about businesses, but we are really, really concerned about the parking. And we do hope you consider the additional parking so the neighbors will be safer. So all of the parking that they are requesting after having studied it as a neighborhood, I live in a neighborhood, I've been a neighborhood president, and we pray that you consider that. The next thing, I sat and I considered as a person who goes to Intrust, that it really would be more convenient for the employees to park over at Intrust because of convenience. Because I do eat meat, and I love conveniences. Thank you, sir.
Just a second. Any questions? Please wish Mr. Roseborough a speedy recovery.
Thank you so much. I'll tell him.
Anyone else that would like to speak? Yes.
Let's switch.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I can stand behind them. Hi, my name is Michael Fowler. I live on 409 North Vassar. As you see here, right there, I can tell you for a fact there's only 3 places that are available after we park there. Because everyone on the street in that area parks their cars there. So there's only, after that, there's only 3 places available. Thank you, that's all.
Any questions? Okay, anybody else that'd like to speak? Seeing no one else, we have time for a 3-minute rebuttal. 3 minutes. 3 minutes.
That's Dale.
Again, Paul Gray for the record, agent applicant.
2 minutes.
I appreciate your consideration. A lot of things have been brought up today. And I think the biggest concern among the neighbors is they want to be able to access their homes. They want to be able to access their streets. No one has a crystal ball. All we can do is do the best job we can of assessing what we believe our need is. And that is more deliberate action than just following prescriptively what the code describes as needed by every business. The code unfortunately says minimum standards of parking, which may or may not be applicable to everybody, and we believe that our use will be less demand than what is cited by that code minimum. Additionally, as being good neighbors and good property owners, if at some point in time in the future we deem that our parking is insufficient, we would seek additional agreements with our neighbors outside of our property lines, such as Intrust Bank, such as working together with the dentist to see if there's a use there that we could come to. But it's hard to do that at this stage when we don't know that those needs are directly necessarily need to be met. Additionally, we can't proceed with the full construction of our building until we have either some form of variance or a long-term solution to our parking. So we have a building at this stage that we're allowed to build and have one tenant placed in it, and we have space allocated that we can't build out. We can't find tenants for until we come to an agreement. So that's the need for us today, is to settle this in some manner that allows us to proceed with the construction and filling up of our space. I stand for any questions that you may have.
Green?
Yeah, Mr. Gray, there was a comment made about your agreement with your parking arrangement at Intrust.
Yes.
Is that, like the speaker said, Saturday and Sunday only?
No, it's outside of business hours.
Okay.
The bank, the lobby at the bank closes at 5 o'clock. The bank is open until noon on Saturdays. We believe that, our additional traffic, if we were to have those overflow needs, they're going to be in the evening times, or they're going to be the weekends and so forth. But again, the dentist next door, his hours are kind of counter to our own operating hours. They only open till noon on Friday. They're closed over the weekends. They close at 5 p.m. There's other alternatives out there other than dictating we follow the normal prescriptive measure that's in the code for when you develop fresh sites. So that's why the code, and that's why the spirit of the ordinance and the law allows us to ask for variances like this for situations such as this, on projects and properties such as this. As much as everybody, we're considered developers for this project. The people who own the property, that own this lot that I'm building this building for, they've owned this land for 15 years. They bought this quite a while ago, and it's only been up until now that the economic conditions were conducive enough for them to actually build this building. So our property owner has been in the business in the neighborhood a long time. Thank you.
Second. Mr. Blake?
I'd like to make a motion to approve staff's
A
recommendation.
second. I don't think we're done with questions yet on the rebuttal. Mr. Foster?
Mr. Gray, I just want to thank you for helping to clarify a lot of these parking questions. And I also want to thank staff for their deferral on this, because there's a lot of information to bring to light here, and you've done a good job on that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions? Ms. Miles?
I just have one more question. So I know that you compared the parking needs for this location to other locations around town, but I guess we all know location is really important. So have you done any comparisons of some of the other restaurants along Central to see what their traffic is like?
Not officially. I tried to be very controlled in my assessment and study of what we did, but my office used to not be very far from here, and I frequented Panera a lot. And one of the things I hated about going to Panera is they didn't have a drive-through. It was one of my favorite restaurants, and I'd go to Chipotle, and so it's really hard and difficult to assess a light comparison between some of those.
Any other questions? Okay, we'll bring it back to the commission, and I think I heard Mr. Blick start to say something before I
Sorry.
rudely interrupted.
You're fine. I just make a motion to approve staff's recommendations.
Okay, Mr. Blick, motion, Mr. McKay, second. Now we have discussion. Mr. Foster?
It's a question for staff. We've talked different scenarios relative to this, and we've, narrowly defined a certain restaurant and things like that. Well, how do we guarantee going into the future that that's going to be the scenario, that it's this particular restaurant, the timing's going to work, the amount of seating and everything like that? How do we know what could happen if this changed to a different restaurant?
I think it's like any other zone change or decision that's made. You use the best decision that you can based on the facts that you have at this point in time and do what you think is appropriate.
Second question is, has a final landscape plan been submitted for this and reviewed?
Yes, there is a landscape plan. Let's see. There it is. It's hard to read, but that was submitted August of 17.
And so would approval for this be at 31 spaces? We would rely on the administrative adjustment, or is this particular, if we take the staff recommendation, is this being approved for the 26th?
The variance is for 26. There would be no reason to do administrative adjustment.
Well, I frankly feel the 31 is a better scenario, and also a condition to relinquish the cross-lot agreement so those 5 could be gained for this. I think that's Mr. Johnson, I thought, brought up a real good point of getting to an administrative adjustment is a better situation for this. And I think we need to work the conditions so this can get to 31 rather than down to 26, because that's just way too low on it. Just to finish up, I've got just a general comment. If you look at this from a review standpoint, all of these different elements related to site design have come back to haunt this site all these years. Whether it's the landscaping, whether it's the parking, just a whole host of things have made this tough to develop. And I think that's endemic with the infill conditions that are looked at. And so, again, I'll mention this infill committee, the importance of their job. I do want to make a comment, though, about the architecture. I think that has not been touched upon here, but frankly, the scale of this, we don't know what the final look is, but yet it's not in proportion to the neighborhood. You look at the endodontic service to the east, you look at Intrust, they understood the neighborhood. They got it right when they designed that building at a certain scale, used certain materials, used certain roof structures. A site plan review process would have helped this to be a better fit for the neighborhood. Anyway, that's more of a comment, but I think it's very important relative to these infill projects. Thank you.
Mr. Bill Johnson.
I think John and I were on here the longest of anybody in here. I can remember when the property at, on the corner of Central and we went around and around. And there were several other properties in that area that I think we reviewed and we heard the same comments. I'm glad to say when I drive down through Central in that area now, I'm very proud of what I see, and it worked out. Is it perfect? No, there isn't such a thing. And yeah, we can put all kinds of restrictions, and being in the construction business, I had the privilege of building a facility in downtown city of Wichita, and at the time, part of the requirements on it was to match the existing residents. We were building a 90,000 square facility. And so when we got ready to do it and I come in front of the planning commission, I had pictures of 26 different homes and I asked them which one I needed to match. So what we say and what we do, I think architecturally, parking, landscaping plans are important, but to try to pin it down to fit, it just don't work. So I'm going to support the motion.
Any other comments? Mr. Warren.
Dealing with infill projects are always difficult because you have the aspect of compromise, trying to come up with a new set of rules for an old property and an old way of doing things. And so you're going to have those kinds of difficulties. As we've been going through this, I live in Derby, so I'm trying to think, okay, we've got a hog wild in Derby, and I agree with Mr. Foster, business has changed, but they're as busy as anybody. It's a fairly typical restaurant. It's probably going to work for most of them most of the time. Is it going to work for all of them all the time? Probably not, but it's going to work for most of the time. The parking that we have available down there is greater than this, but the parking that is used will fit the numbers that are out there. Once in a while, you may have an hour. There may be some peak times when it's going to be difficult, but on a majority of the time, this will work. And so in the spirit of compromise, I will be supporting the motion.
Any other comments? Mr. Foster.
I have a question for Mr. Kuhn. And you may need to go to the podium, Brian. Just to understand the motion, I understand that we're at 26 on the parking space. Is that correct? If we approve this with what we're talking about right now, we're talking about 26 spaces.
That's correct.
Okay, but in my earlier question to you, it was if the cross-lot agreement is lost to the east, then this would allow this to go to 31. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Given that information, I'd offer a substitute motion that we make approval with the condition that the cross-lot agreement to the east would be lost, and that would up the quantity for parking to 31.
Second.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay, we
Thank
have a motion and a second for a substitute motion. Any discussion? Mr. Warren?
I understand where Mr. Foster's going, and it would be my hope that the applicant would work towards getting that, because that makes the most sense for them. Obviously, the more parking, the better for the business. But I don't want to put a gun to their head and put a condition on them that now puts them, behind the eight ball, that they have no choice but to succumb to whatever requirements. I don't want to put the applicant in a position where he has to negotiate from a point of weakness.
Mr. Dole?
I would agree and just state that the applicant is coming in here today stating that he's probably going to work out an agreement for the full number of spots, and all we're talking about today is a contingency plan for him. So to put that condition on there, I would not vote in favor of that.
Any other comments? I guess I would like to just make a comment. I'll probably support the original motion. I think it's unfortunate this has happened, but I think the financial hardship that would be created if we did not approve this would be pretty onerous on the owner. I think what he's developed here is going to be beneficial to the community in the long run as far as something that we want to see work. We don't want to see an empty building sitting there that couldn't work. And I guess I'm just hopeful that all the representations he's made today, he'll go back and try to get those worked out with the various parties in good faith. Thank you. So we have a motion, a substitute motion and a second. We will take it first. All in favor of the substitute motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
What?
If the yeses could raise their hand, please. 3.
Motion fails. 9 to 3. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
So we'll go back to the original motion. Any more discussion on the original motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
See your hands. So 8 to 4 passes. Thank you. Okay. Next item. I close the BZA meeting, and we're back in session as the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission.
Can't do everything.
Okay, and we have, the first item is item number 4, case number CUP 2017 0050. And who's presenting that? Mr. Dave? You're out.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dave here on behalf of staff. This is a case that was originally scheduled for a hearing back in December. Because of modifications made to the request, we republished and we're considering today. The case today deals only with the amendment concerning what now is called Parcel 12A in the Chelsea Station CUP. 12A deals with only this portion of the property, which sits east of Broadmoor. We're south of 21st Street, essentially south of National American University. The original request included also Partial 11, which many of you will recall was amended last August and included apartment development that occurred on that property. It was originally proposed to be modified by reason of this request, and that was subsequently withdrawn, and this has been re-advertised just for consideration of this portion of the property. I also want to make a note for the record. The staff report makes reference to the applicant being FTH or FTF Holdings, Inc., and Chuck Greer. The agent is still Mr. Miller from K.E. Miller Engineering, but the actual owner of the property now is called Broadmoor Development Company, LLC. Sam Coriel is the applicant. This is the aerial photo showing the property in question. We're talking about the open field area that sits at this location south of 21st, and we're west of Broadmoor. Future land use plan shows this for new residential development as noted at the staff report. This is a large version of the entire CUP. We're talking about the area at this location that currently is vacant. It's zone GO general office. This is a larger version of the site plan. I think that's been provided to you in the packet and shows the development. One of the conditions of the approval of the additional apartments in parcel 11 that occurred last summer was that it was a requirement that they provide a second means of access out to Broadmoor. This amendment achieves that. You can see the, and I can back up, the apartment project that was approved last summer is here. It will take access to Broadmoor through this location in parcel 11B, but now a new access will move up to our new parcel, and that access will come out onto Broadmoor as seen on the plan here. This proposal is adding 80 more units total. The large handout you have in the packet shows details of that. This would be all permitted under the geo zoning, and it's consistent with the overall plan. As we note in the staff report, we provided you a copy of, because there's been a lot of questions raised about the overall number of apartments being established within this development. When you take into account the underlying zoning on the bulk of the property, which is MF18, coupled with the permitted right to develop apartments in the GO and the LC zoning, as we noted in the staff report, if the entire operation had been developed total maximum numbers, there would have been over 6,000 dwelling units in this project. The CUP, coupled with other actions, have reduced that significantly. But even with the additional 80 units proposed here, we're still, staff believes, within the broader intent to where we'll be able to support the development as proposed. In short, the recommendation is to approve this amendment. This is some aerial photos showing we're looking east across Broadmoor. This is the property that's actually in N8B. That's the same shot. This is roughly on Broadmoor, and this is the location where the driveway would come out, the second drive access from the property come out to Broadmoor at this location. This is looking south along Broadmoor. You can see the edge of where, I think this is the location where the drive will come out. This is the intersection of 21st and Broadmoor. That's looking east along 21st Street at Broadmoor. This is the driveway that turns into the daycare facility at that location. This is looking back west along 21st Street. This is the parking lot on the north side of the daycare center at that location. The conditions of the approval are outlined within the application or within the staff report. Primarily, it will retain the requirement that a traffic study be done to identify the impact of all the apartments that are approved as a result of all the actions regarding this particular project. Includes all the apartments in parcel 11, what's now being added in parcel 12A, what's been approved within parcel 8A. And one of the requirements will be if the outcome of that analysis determines improvements need to be made, whether it is improvements to Broadmoor, improvements to Rock Hill, improvements at the intersection of Rock Hill and Rock Road, and/or improvements including signalization and other improvements at 21st and Broadmoor. Those all must be done before building permits can be issued for any construction activity. That's a consistent requirement that has been there with respect to all the previous recent amendments adding additional apartments to the project. As I noted, staff is recommending approval. We feel that this is consistent with the overall comprehensive plan and vision for what we wish to see within the community. This does fall within that the central established area of the city, and the approval is consistent with the plan. So I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions for the presenter? Seeing none. Agent or applicant? You have 10 minutes.
Kirk Miller, K.E. Miller Engineering, the agent on the project. We're in concurrence with the staff comments. Like Mr. Yearout said, parcel 11 was approved in August of last year. This will be just a continuation of what was there, of what's already been approved. It'll be the same architectural style, same uses, pretty much the same thing all the way through. This is further north than what was approved, so it's further away from the single-family residences to the south. And I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Go ahead and state your address.
117 East Lewis.
Any questions? Who had a question on this before? Anybody? Okay, I think it was just the audience. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Now we'll go to the audience for comment. Who would like to be first?
Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to field my comments to the commission, to MAPD. I would first like to open my comments by thanking what amendments or discussions surrounding the previous amendments have taken place. Thank you, Dave, for considering the mention of all of those. It was incumbent, I believe, to consider the impact of the commission's previous decisions insofar as qualifying the number of vehicles that will be added to the community, or that be moving through the community. And that is aggregately between the 2016 CUP -22 and the last year's August 1st CUP 2017-24, which includes 303 units plus this additional 80 units vehicles. The resulting total of number of vehicles just in the number of parking lot spaces will approach upwards of almost 1,000, 872 parking stalls between the two previous CUP amendments. To this end, before I begin with what is needed and what Dave Yearout has, staff member Dave Yearout has addressed, I'd like to see someone or something done about the school buses that drop off and pick up students various times of the day. high traffic issues. When the buses extend their stop sign semaphores, that will also exacerbate the amount of, or the level of congestion that these two projects will bring to the neighborhood. In addition to that particular issue, I'd like to, with respect to congestion, safety, parking, noise, the school bus loading zones, I'm going to drop with the property values. It goes without saying that the project does meet the MAPC requirements by providing two accesses. However, when considered with the previous Sundance apartment complex amendment, the proposed Sundance access is located at a position that is directly opposite the current proposed, the last two proposed amendments.
Your time's up, sir, but I will grant you an additional 1 minute.
Thank you.
If you state your name and address and show us where you reside.
My fault. My name is William Landman. I live at 7114 East Chatto Street, which is generally located right there.
Thank you.
What I'm mentioning is that the 2016 amendment allows, or provides an access right here, which is generally right opposite the primary access for the CUP 2017-24, which provides 303 apartment units and upwards of 572 vehicles. This 80 most current project will allow 252 additional vehicles to access Broadmoor south of where the school buses will pick up and offload at high or peak traffic hours. When they extend their signal, their stop signs, semaphores, it will shut down traffic in and out of the area. That's just one of many considerations.
I think I have the authority to give you 1 more minute.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Here's a view of where the school buses generally pick up or let off. They pick up on this side and they let off on the other side. This particular, I don't think I'm on my, I've humbly submitted a PowerPoint presentation, but I do not see it loaded. Forgive me here.
Let me control it. I'll get it for you.
Okay, here we go. Thank you. It's loading.
How much time is left there?
24 hours.
Okay, thank you. Right now, we're looking at the Wichita Business Journal's recent article in which they highlighted that 21st and Rock is, at this particular year, the 5th most dangerous. It annually falls within the number 5 or 8, somewhere in between that, year after year. It's a very, it goes without saying, it is very highly traveled. This is a former rendering from 1979, which provided or depicted the quality of life recreational amenities that are going to be going away. This is the number. This represents the current rendering from the previous year's CUP amendment. It shows seven new apartment buildings, 252 additional vehicles from Sundance, and this is located, their access is located right across the street, if you will, from the primary entrance that was provided by last year's CUP 24.
Okay, I'll have to ask you to stop. Is there anyone else that's going to speak that can carry on from where you are?
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, next speaker. Oh, wait a minute, wait, sir.
question?
We have a question. Mr. Warren?
I understand your concern. Specifically, what are you asking for? Denial?
Everything that Mr. Yearout has qualified in terms of what will be addressed at any subsequent traffic study, I would hope that all of these issues will be earnestly combined and nothing omitted. That's what I'm asking for. Thank you.
Any other questions for the speaker? Seeing none, next speaker. You have,
Can you put it back to the one where it showed the topic? Yeah, there we go. Okay, my name is Jim Brewy. I live at 1955 North Talleyrand, which is right on the corner of Broadmoor and Talleyrand. Okay, how many of you have actually been out there and physically seen the area? Very good. Well, you know that Broadmoor and Rock Hill is not a 4-lane street. You can barely get 4 cars there. And is it required that the apartments have parking space inside off the street? If you take a look, probably 50% of those apartments, Sundance, park on the street because they don't want to go. I want you to make it required or make that no parking anytime on Broadmoor and Rock Hill, okay? And do you realize, without an access on 21st, that on Broadmoor, in that 3-4 block area, you're cramming probably another 3,000 or 4,000 automobiles to be dumped at peak times in a, like I said, 3 or 4 block area. Anyway, that's my speech. And what I want is access to 21st, not to Broadmoor. Thank you.
any questions for the speaker? Seeing none, thank you. Next speaker, you have 3 minutes and state your name and address.
My name is Patrick Cantwell. I live at 2021 North Broadmoor, Unit 102. I was the first one to move into Chelsea Square Townhomes Friday, August 26, 1982 at 12:35 p.m. when my contract came through. Now, the reason I say that is I've been there for 35 years. At one time, utility contractors, Landmark Communities, were going to develop 160 townhomes in the area where we're planning to put in 303, where they want to put in 303 apartments. Now it's 303 with developers from Springfield and other places. And I commend them for trying to do some things. I just wish they wouldn't do it in my neighborhood, because from my address, 2021 to 21st Street, 2199, you're going to add 303 apartments in one area if it is accepted. Another 80, and then 168 across the street at Sundance, which means that, counting the apartments, let alone the vehicles, you have a bunch. If you allow 1.5 to 2 vehicles per unit, you're going to have over 900, almost 1,000 vehicles, ingress, egress, entering, leaving, however many times a day, once, twice, 3, 4 times. Now, the most concise explanation that I've received about this amendment came from this forum and from Mr. Yearout's presentation. I now understand the issue. I was going to address another issue. I was wrong. I would ask you, if you could please, when you're reviewing this, when you're making your decisions, to consider denying this amendment. Well stated, but I would ask you to look at page 3 and page 4 as you review it. Because with this amendment, this allows another parking ingress, egress. It allows 2, which is required by the traffic study. I am opposed to the development. I'm going on record. I acknowledge that. But I'm opposed to the whole development. But this amendment allows the development to proceed until such time as a traffic study is done. And as the 2 gentlemen before me said, we have 3 lanes of traffic at the intersection of Rock Hill and Rock Road. 3 lanes of traffic at the intersection of 21st and Broadmoor. We have a dedicated right turn to the east, a dedicated left turn to the west, heading north off of Broadmoor onto 21st Street. Both lanes, eastbound, westbound on 21st Street, if they wish to turn onto Broadmoor and head south for whatever reason, have to turn into 1 lane. There's a fire hydrant there, which can be moved. There's a La Petite Child Care Academy, and the driveway is immediately, just within a sweetheart's whisper of the intersection of 21st and Broadmoor. Now, the point I'm trying to make, and I know I have limited time, 8 seconds to go. I think it's a dangerous intersection. There is no dedicated left turn lane on 21st Street to turn south. Thank you. There is no dedicated left turn lane on 21st Street to turn south on the Broadmoor. If people do manage to turn left and right off of 21st Street, they're turning into an area where the buses commence on both sides of Broadmoor in the mornings and the afternoons, next to La Petite Child Care Academy, next to a dormitory for a Christian parochial school. And those 942 to 1,000 additional cars going back and forth on Broadmoor with 2 accesses, ingress and egress on Broadmoor, I think creates an unnecessary dangerous situation. In closing, what I would say is this. It may go through. It may go through. But what bothers me is the environmental problems that we might have, with the ground being slightly elevated above the existing Chelsea Square homes where I live, right on Broadmoor. I don't mean 3 feet, but a few inches. And to the south to where Mr. Brewy lives. That water has to drain someplace. Retention pond is in the northwest corner, completely opposite where the residences are. I think that causes an environmental problem, and I also think that the danger to the community by the addition of the additional vehicles is dangerous. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Any questions for the speaker? Okay, next speaker, please. Is that everyone that wanted to speak? If so, I'll bring it back to the commission. Oh, sorry.
He's already spoken. He's already spoken.
He's spoken 15 minutes.
Yeah. I'll bring it back to the commission.
Rebuttal?
Yeah. Bring it back to the commission and ask for rebuttal. How'd I do?
I know a lot of the concerns out there are the traffic, and we've agreed there will be a traffic study done, improvements made before they ever get a building permit. So if they proceed to start doing site work or something like that without having a traffic study done and everything like that, they're doing it on their own. They still won't get the building permit until the traffic study's done and everything's been initiated to make that happen. Mr. Landman mentioned something about the access points where the Sundance and the one for Chelsea Square come to the same point. Actually, that was planned, I'm sure, on the Sundance part, because you want those 2 drives to be opposite of each other, so you have less chance for collisions out. We basically create an intersection, you have less chance for collision there. If you look at the north part that we're doing the amendment on right now, that's a larger area, and that's probably where our signage will go, because we don't have room for signage down at the south entrance. So that'll pretty much be the main entrance where we'd anticipate most of the traffic going in and out of it. So which would also reduce some of the conflicts down at the south entrance. There was also some concern about the drainage. And on the west side of this property, we've got a big drainage ditch over there. We'll use storm sewer. We'll get everything over to that drainage ditch and over the detention pond through use of storm sewer, so will not drain to the south and will not drain to the east. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Mr. Miller answered my question on the drainage. Just explain a little bit more on that. In order to get a building permit, you will have to ensure that the drainage is taken care of before you do any work.
The drainage and the traffic, yes.
Any other questions for the applicant.
Mr. Miller, when the traffic study is done, and this may be a question as much for staff, let's just say that comes back and we need major improvements to that north Rock Hill and 21st Street intersection. Who gets to pay for that? I mean, is it all the owners in the Chelsea CUP? Who's committed to do that? Is it just your two developments there that?
It would be our development,
And that
and
cost?
hopefully we would be getting help from Sundance for their increase in the traffic also, but we'd be the ones that have to submit the petition, and we would be the benefit district. Sundance, that little addition over there, has the same requirement for traffic study and everything else.
That's
so.
the undeveloped piece to the north there,
Correct.
right? Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Foster.
Mr. Miller, on the traffic study, what's the guarantee that whoever undertakes that is going to look at the maximum scenario of, all of these different things that have been talked about in terms of the number of units? Is it a given that that's what they're going to look at, the total number in that area?
Yes, your traffic study would encompass everything in that CUP, everything that we get on that road. And what guarantees that it's that way would be Brian Kuhn when he reviews it.
I'm talking about even in addition, we've had others, properties come forward on this to the east that are driving additional numbers. And I'm counting on those numbers being addressed as well in this study.
Previous approvals would include the 303 units that have been approved on parcel 11, which is this area, the 168 units that have been approved on this project, the 80 units that are in consideration today. All those will be added to the current traffic loads that exist on Broadmoor, on Rock Hill, and in conversations I've had with the city traffic department, they've indicated that they're fully aware that they kind of anticipate, we'll be looking at reworking the intersection at Rock Hill and Rock Road. They're anticipating a highly likelihood, major reconstruction and modifications, possibly even with signals at 21st and Broadmoor. All those things are going in fully expecting that's what's going to occur. But the proposed loads that you're adding onto the existing roadway are going to be based on the number of units. It's got nothing to do whether it's restricted to seniors only or, no, that's not how they do that kind of stuff. And it's all also, we'll take into account existing loads that are happening based on traffic counts on Broadmoor and on Rock Hill, as well as all the other impacts. And they are all contracts and requirements are built in that the improvements that are determined to be necessary by the result of the what that study says shall be guaranteed by the developers, which would be the developers of all three projects.
Mr. Foster.
And the traffic study could find a reduction in the number of units might be appropriate relative to the traffic load, just the flip side of this discussion.
Historically, a traffic study is not going to make a valuation judgment on that kind of perspective. They're simply going to take into account the traffic load impacts on the road system and what would be needed to adjust for the road system. And that, as I said in the staff report, could be intersection improvements, could be widening of the roads with other improvements made online. All those kinds of things can be done as part of the project.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the commission for action. What's the will of the commission?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Warren, second by Mr. Green. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, so it's 11-0. Okay. Is this the one you had a question about, Mr. Foster?
Oh, let's see. It was me.
Number 5.
Yeah,
Did you want to hear a full presentation? Why don't you
Well,
ask your question and we'll
okay,
decide?
If you could put the map up there where you have the pins and where car lots are already,
Yep. And I have this map as well, which kind of tells the same story. If this map is based on data that we have in our GIS layers. The highlighted parcels are the ones that have been identified as having the same designation that this use would have. And then this was a result of, I mean, literally just me driving up and down Broadway a couple times and making note of other uses of this type on Broadway between Kellogg and Pawnee, which is, I chose that area because that's the area contained within the area plan.
I think I spoke out of turn. This is not the one I was thinking of. So we'll have a full presentation.
I'm sorry, this
Let's
is,
just go ahead with the full presentation because we have people in the audience that want to speak about this.
Okay. So this is a conditional use, oh, Kyle Kobe with staff. This is a conditional use application to allow vehicle sales at the southeast corner of the intersection of South Broadway Avenue and East Mount Vernon Road. What you see here is an aerial view of the location in question. Here's a zoning map showing that basically the entirety of Broadway Avenue right now is zoned for limited commercial. This use is only allowable with a conditional use within the limited commercial zoning district. What you see here is the site plan proposed or that was submitted by the applicant. It indicates the area reserved for car sales as well as the existing building. And I have some notes in the staff report about this. The building is approximately 3,500 square feet, about 8,400 square feet of sales parking, 14 parking spaces. There are a few revisions to this that we would need to see indicated if this application were approved. Those things being that the sales lot area seems to be indicating that is extending past this line right here, which we would need it to still observe setback regulations. That there would need to be a fence or barrier of some kind around the area reserved for sales lot parking, and that we would need to see some kind of screening indicated along the eastern property line because that property line abuts, there's residential on the eastern side of them. So here is an excerpt from the future growth concept map from the comprehensive plan for the city. As you can see here, it references the South Central plan. So when going to the South Central plan, the land use map for that, right here I have indicated the site of the proposed car lot, and what this map indicates is that it is intended for mixed-use commercial development. And I believe that both of these are in the attachments to the staff report that you have available to you. The mixed-use commercial designation that does not seem to be explaining the type of development that this conditional use would be suggesting. Here's the map that I was speaking to you about earlier. These are other places that are indicated as a similar kind of use, or they're designated with the exact same kind of use, rather. And then this is the result of a visual inspection. This is just to kind of give a visual frame of reference for the area. Here is a picture looking east at the site. So this is the existing structure right here in the parking lot. This is looking south at the site. West along Mount Vernon. So here's the intersection of Broadway and Mount Vernon. And then this is kind of just the same thing, but kind of giving you a look at this other corner here. Looking northwest from the site, so here's that intersection again. This is just giving you a different angle, sort of the context. And then looking directly west from the site. And here's north along Broadway. There's that same intersection again with the subject site right over here. So like I said, the recommendation that you saw to your question that you had was based primarily on the fact that the area plan, the land use plan that we have for that area specifies that this is not indicated as the type of development that they would like. And in addition to that, they have locational guidelines that I believe was also a part of the attachments in your staff report that list this as one of the least desirable land uses. And item 3 on that same list indicates that they would strongly recommend against approving zone changes and conditional uses for uses located within the of the type that are indicated as least desirable land uses. Questions?
You were saying earlier, does it fall through the recommendations of the South Central Community Plan? Is that what the
Right,
what you were
the
saying?
land use plan is like a subset of the neighborhood plan. Yeah.
Okay, sounds great. That's what I was wondering.
Any other questions for the presenter? Mr. Green?
So directly across the street to the west is a car sales lot, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
This would be directly across the street from a similar use. It's, you know, I don't know if visually it's going to look identical, but it would be the same.
I understand. I guess I'm just suggesting that the same type of business is directly across the street, and it's okay, but this one is not.
Well, if it was existing prior to the plan going into place, I can't speak to that. I didn't do research on when all of these uses went into place. This was the one that came across as, you know, an application right now. So I was just, you know, we're just applying what the planning documents say for the area now. And part of the reason for indicating that there were several other ones, many other ones in the area already, is that just that there are other ones in the area. Yes.
Who made this plan? The plan you're talking to about?
It was part of the, adopted by, at the time of the Planning Commission. They set up a committee, there were neighbors, there were stakeholders. It's the typical land use process that we use.
So, okay, but
It would be
I
sim-
remember back in the 50s, that was car lot row, just like West Street's
I
becoming
think that's part of the
car lot
reason why the
row.
plan says what it says.
And well, yeah, they don't want it there, but it is there, and it's just reality that it is there. And it was there in the 50s, I know, as a kid, and riding in a car, and then in the 60s, I'd shop for cars down there. So it doesn't make sense to me about the plan, actually, they just don't want them there for some reason.
Any other questions?
Are we gonna hear the case or?
Okay. Let's go for comment from the public. Who would like to speak first?
Have an applicant?
We got a long afternoon. How about the applicant?
My name is Christopher Clark, address 7701 East Kellogg Drive, Suite 630. I am the agent of the applicant and the architect on this project. I am not here to dispute the prevalence of other car sales in this area, as I believe has been pointed out pretty clearly. And myself and the agent are both, or the applicant are both aware of the most desirable uses encouraged by the South Central Neighborhood Land Use Plan. However, there are several other unique conditions related to this property that we would like to bring to the committee's attention. Perhaps first and foremost, there are substantial deed restrictions imposed by the previous owner. This was a former Quick Trip, and as with all Quick Trips, they are very smart to keep competitors out of the area. Restricted uses on this land include convenience stores, grocery stores, donut shops, coffee shops, fast food restaurants, fast casual restaurants, smoke shops, liquor stores, gas stations, and any retail or food service selling candy, chips, donuts, sandwiches, pizzas, snacks, coffees, and/or soda. So these restrictions alone rule out most of what would be the most desirable uses that would be feasible for this property from the neighborhood plan. The local market has also demonstrated that this location is undesirable or impractical for most retail or restaurant use. And the evidence of this is twofold. The property was vacant and listed for sale for 2 years prior to being purchased by the applicant. In that time, it's been vandalized. There are, I believe, currently still a homeless population using the trash enclosure, none of which are good things for the neighboring properties. The only interest from potential end users or lessees has been for vehicle sales or a loan/pawn shop. Now, the use of a pawn shop is permitted by the Unified Zoning Code within a limited commercial district without a conditional use permit. And I don't say that to say that as an ultimatum, but the applicant believes it to be, as a pawn shop, to be a lesser use and of disservice to the neighborhood. So with that consideration, we are looking at car sales. The South Central Neighborhood Land Use Plan, in regards to areas categorized as a mixed-use commercial such as this one, specifically encourages two components. The first of which is perhaps less relevant. It calls for, as in the paragraph right here, apartments located above shops or offices. And while this is an admirable concept to promote walkable communities and something that I personally wish were a little more prevalent, most of our city doesn't have the density to justify that, and it's typically only found in the CBD. The second point is that the plan encourages commercial uses that preserve existing single-family structures. This is what some of the other vehicle sale businesses, as shown on the map, have done, and with all due respect to those business owners, oftentimes the result is neither aesthetically pleasing nor particularly architecturally compatible with the neighborhood context. And I would even argue that many of these structures are non-conforming with many or even most of the codes enforced by the local authority, and that the character of these structures likely lowers the value of the neighboring properties. On the other hand, a well-designed commercial use in a commercial building, such as what the applicant has proposed here, is not only safe and appropriate, but could increase the value of the surrounding properties. Also, the adaptive reuse of a well-built existing structure rather than raising it and rebuilding something that would potentially meet the most desirable uses is also the sustainable choice. So, in closing, we're not looking for any loopholes here. The project will be completed in compliance with all codes enforced by the local authority. To the comment about, part of the car sales area encroaching on the property line, we were basically just indicating the area that is currently paved. So apparently Quick Trip encroached on that property line, and we can certainly address that once we get beyond preliminary plans. On that note, plans have been prepared by licensed architects and engineers, and we're seeking your approval of this application to allow the issuance of a building permit. Thank you.
Questions? Mr. Foster.
Please state again the restrictions on the property and who imposed those restrictions. When you initially started, you had a laundry list there.
Yeah, it's pretty lengthy. So Quick Trip West Incorporated is the previous owner. I did not bring a copy of the warranty deed, but I basically made a bullet point list of all those restricted uses. Those include convenience stores, grocery stores, donut shops, coffee shops, fast food restaurants, fast casual restaurants, smoke shops, liquor stores, adult-oriented stores, gas stations, and it closes with any retail or food service selling candy, chips, donuts, sandwiches, pizza, snacks, coffee, and or soda. So essentially any food service.
Mr. Foster.
You had mentioned that I believe the applicant had purchased this. So the property was purchased with this warranty deed?
Yes, this is a deed restriction that Quick Trip puts on essentially all of their properties, and unfortunately, it's one of the reasons why a lot of Quick Trips have sat vacant, including the one at 37th and Rock.
Well, if the applicant's purchased the property, how does Quick Trip have any say in it?
It's filed on the warranty deed with the county. It's a legal restriction on the use. It's essentially the word's escaping me, but it's a use restriction.
It's a deed restriction.
Yes. It's like a restrictive covenant is the word I was looking for.
Mr. Richardson.
It's a well-known tactic for Quick Trips, which makes their sites pretty undesirable. And Is there any kind of restaurant would be allowed? I mean, I guess if you sell coffee, you can't have a restaurant.
They allow full service restaurants
Full
only.
service,
So they
okay.
specifically say no fast food, no fast casual, and nothing selling
So you can't,
any of that laundry
as
list
long
of
as you
items.
don't carry anything out, you'd be okay, right? I mean, is there anything you could do here to enhance what this is going to look like with regards to landscaping or that sort of thing? That would make it more palatable with the proposed plan. I understand there's car lots all the way up and down there, but there is a desire on the part of the neighborhood to make their neighborhood better, and we have to start someplace. And I understand the deed restrictions. It's Quick Trip does it all the time. Is there a way to maybe make this fit a little better with the neighborhood, even though it is going to be a car lot?
Absolutely, and I think I can probably best speak to the building itself. Again, I mentioned we've only submitted preliminary plans to MAPC at this point, which triggered the conditional use item. We do have some preliminary renderings. I don't have them here to share with you, but we do intend to do some improvements to the building itself to modernize it and make it much more aesthetically pleasing than it already is. No offense to whoever designed Quick Trips, but the Quick Trip original stores are not the most attractive.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Clark. We'll go out to the audience now. Is that okay, Chuck? Okay, thank you. For comments, please state your name and address, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Janet Price. I live at 2010 South Water Street, and I am the president of the South Central Neighborhood Association and South Central Improvement Alliance, and those two groups would not support having another car lot in our area. As you could see from the map he showed, we're inundated with those and bars, and we've asked those to not add any further of those kind of businesses to our area. And so we are not in support and would not like to see that quick shop turned into another car lot. We appreciate your consideration for the prior land use map that we have done. Thank you.
Any questions?
I have a question for you.
Ma'am, Mr. Blick?
So this is your plan, correct? That you guys initiated and started through your South Central Neighborhood Association, is this correct?
This plan was done way before I became involved. When the initial plan for that area was done, they voted that they didn't want any other businesses as car lots and bars in our area. Those seem to be the predominant stuff in our area, and we'd like to return it more to a neighborhood, a family neighborhood, instead of these businesses. I think that the land use decisions were made either in the late 90s or early 2000, but I didn't bring that book with me today. I'm sorry.
As the applicant said, it's very restricted to have anything in that area. So is it better to just have nothing in there that you see than actually a business that's improving that area?
I think we'd like to see a business improve the area, but I think we'd like to see a business that was useful to the neighborhood rather than another car lot when we already have an extensive amount in our area.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Any other questions? Seeing none, next speaker, please.
My name is Katherine Johnson. I live at 1106 South Waco. I'm also a member of the board of the South Central Neighborhood Alliance. I've lived in the neighborhood for 10 years, and I've also co-founded a nonprofit that works in that neighborhood, so I live and work there. I came here thinking that I don't want another car lot either. That's certainly not, does not go with the neighborhood plan that we've spoken of. So I just want to register that. And then also, I was dismayed to hear about those restrictions put on the land by Quick Trip being there previously. And I realize that that does take out a lot of the healthy options that we would prefer. I appreciate you, Mr. Richardson, for commenting on at least could we make the best of this car lot if it were to happen? How could we make that more of an asset to the neighborhood? Something that is more beautiful and has attractive landscaping at least. So I appreciate that comment. Thank you.
Questions for the speaker? Thank you. Next speaker, please. Anyone else like to address?
Good afternoon. My name is Steve Falke. I live at 3 Crestview Lakes Estates in Wichita. And I didn't come here today intending to speak on this matter, but you've brought up a good point that I would just like to make a comment on. I've been a small business entrepreneur for 30 years in this city. I'm serving currently as the president of a small neighborhood association, Crestview Lakes Homeowners Association, and we live in a neighborhood, Northeast Heights, and to the south of there that also has one of these vacant small Quick Trips in it at 13th and Oliver that has been sitting vacant for quite a while. And I can certainly appreciate the business that has purchased this property wanting to put something in there that makes financial sense. And I would hope that you could see the disparity that is being leveraged by Quick Trip when they put these restricted covenants on a small piece of land, a footprint that certainly couldn't damage their business when they upgrade all of these sites to their new behemoths that they currently have, which are incredibly cool, and I might add. But all I would like to just go on record as saying, is there anything that can be done with these warranty deeds that would open the restrictions? Maybe a distance, from a new Quick Trip to the old one, or something that could be taken into consideration. But that's just my comment. I think the Quick Trip is overstepping their boundaries by putting restrictions on land they're selling.
By the head shaking of our attorney, I think they're perfectly within the rights of doing what they're doing. Is that correct? That's correct. Thank you for your comments. Any questions? Anyone else from the audience would like to speak on this matter? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the commission.
Each case is the same.
Mr. Clark, would you like to come up for a rebuttal period? I think you have 2 minutes.
I think there's been a lot of good points brought up, especially with regards to if this is going to be a car lot, can we at least make it, something desirable? And, I just mentioned to the vice president of the neighborhood association, I'm not going to design anything that I wouldn't be proud to put my name on as a building and as a site. And, having become familiar with my client, the property owner, I don't think he is either. So we're definitely gonna do our best to make this a desirable property. Again, there's a lot of restrictions on this lot that unfortunately at this point we have no control over. So we're very limited in our options. I hate the fact that the options, as far as what the market has had interest in right now is either car sales or a pawn shop. That's pretty unfortunate, and I wish there were more options than that. But, it is what it is. And at this point, I don't want it to be a pawn shop. I don't think any of the nearby neighbors do either. And so, we're kind of faced with this option of, okay, it either is a car sales lot or it sits vacant. And if it is a car sales lot, we do our best with it.
Any questions? Thank you. Bring it back to the commission and Mr. Johnson, Bill Johnson.
I got a staff question.
Oh, what?
This is a staff question.
It's right
Since
there.
this is going on where Quick Trip controls these properties like that, because you see them all over town sitting vacant for a long time, and You know, I don't know, they have to acquire permits and zoning in some case. Surely there's some way of doing some restrictions to that, rather they're forced to tear it down and make a park or whatever when they're requesting being able to do this. I can see where staff's hands are tied with what they're looking at, but I don't like to see these things set vacant, and I don't like to see another pawn shop with everything parked outside.
I guess my thought would be, you would think the impact of having land that they've invested in sitting vacant for a long period of time where they're not getting their money back would be an incentive to open it up. But obviously they can afford to basically just
Eliminate competition.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Richardson, I think, was next.
You know, one of the things that I think here's perhaps a criticism of the staff a little, this is a conditional use, and I don't see any suggestions in this conditional use that we put additional restrictions with regards to landscaping and that sort of thing. It would have been helpful to say that if we approve this, let's do it in the following manner. And I don't, maybe I'm not seeing it here. I see some suggestions you have, but I don't see anything except suggestions that it meets the current code. And I think because it's a conditional use, we can put any sort of reasonable restrictions on it that we would choose to do so, unless I'm mistaken. Is that?
Yeah, that's correct. When staff makes these recommendations in an effort to try and be fair, we look at what's been approved in the past and include those recommendations, move them forward. If the commission as a whole decides that you'd like to up the ante, we'll certainly start doing that in the future, but we're basically following.
Yeah. Only because this is a part of an adopted plan here. We have neighborhoods involved in developing this plan. The suggestion's been to deny it because of those reasons, but we have a lot of reasons that this site needs to be used. And I think there's some sort of compromise here that could, you know, again, it may be a bit of a financial burden to make this a little different sort of car lot, but maybe we could help both sides of this equation by doing so. And I don't see that suggested here. I'm not quite sure where to go from here with that idea, except to have more landscaping or setbacks or something that needs more study than certainly I can give it right here. And the only way to do that would be to defer it and come back with some additional suggestions by the staff that I can see.
Mr. Daly?
Staff, can a pawn shop go in this by our code, not by?
Right. Pawn shops are permitted in the LC district. Now, if the plan suggests that they're not appropriate, then we would follow the guidelines suggested by the plan. But as far as LC zoning, pawn shops are permitted in that zoning district absent.
And I do see advertisements and I do see pawn shops that have cars that have been pawned, so it does turn into a junky car lot. So that's why I asked that question.
And staff has been very consistent whenever there's been a request for a vehicle sales place in the South Central neighborhood, we have consistently recommended denial.
Question. So a pawn shop, Dale, is outdoor storage allowed because it is a pawn shop, even though it's in LC and normally you don't have outdoor storage?
Well, no, I mean, a pawn shop would be allowed, but they would not be able to display vehicles.
Okay.
That's a different question.
That's my question, but yeah, because it would take
They'd have to have
GC
a conditional use.
to do that, or GC zoning, which they don't have.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Warren?
I think that the road we're heading down is because of our hands being tied in so many ways that we're probably leaning towards figuring out a way to approve this. I'm going to defer to Mr. Foster, who is our resident in standing on trees and shrubs, to come up with a simple number of trees per linear foot, or come up with some kind of a compromise that would allow us to prove this with some additional decorating to it that would allow us to do this and not defer.
Are you suggesting like we double or triple the normal landscape
Like I
requirement?
said, I'm going to defer to Mr. Foster because he understands that side of the book way better than I do.
That's not a leading question, but go ahead. Mr. Clark, could you come back to the podium?
Here we go. Actually, before I address Mr. Warren's thought there, I do want to make sure, have you studied page 6 of the staff report, which has 8 suggestion conditions and standards for us to consider as part of this approval here?
Is that the page that's a copy of what would normally be required for a conditional use approval?
From the, be item X, vehicle and equipment sales, outdoor and.
Yeah, from the Unified Zoning Code. Yes, all of those conditions will be met. Again, we're not looking for any loopholes. To kind of build on that, one, while we're talking about possible other conditions of the approval, if there is to be that, one idea that came to mind is typically parking lots or car sales can either be screened from the main road, in this case Broadway, by either a fence or by landscaping. Pretty much all of them that I've seen driving up and down Broadway chose the fence option. And, a lot of times that's not a very inviting look. It's not very neighborhood friendly. I would almost propose that, if there is to be a condition that we're required to use the landscape approach. With that said, all of the landscaping, as we saw, I can't go back to it, but the site plan, all of the landscaping between Broadway and our parking lot is off property. So off the top of my head, I don't know how much control we have over what we do with that, knowing that it's in a public right of way, but I would prefer there to be landscaping over a wrought iron fence or something of that nature.
Well, let's go ahead and talk design. My understanding on car sales is the screening is not required where you have display of vehicles. Maybe staff needs to correct me, but that's the way we've always done it, which certainly makes sense when that's your product. So, the concept here of having some sort of a barrier makes every bit of sense. So I would address Mr. Warren's thought twofold. Number one would be to challenge you as an architect to think of some architectural treatments, which I think you're already thinking of for the structure, but also in the treatment of this barrier, perhaps it might be a little bit more pleasing as a transition to the neighborhood. And then on the landscape part of it, wherever it does abut to those residential areas, I think it would be appropriate on a lot of these. We've upped the amount of landscape to 1.5 times, which frankly does not work out to be a lot, but it's just that little bit that makes it a little bit nicer for those folks that are adjacent to it. And just one final thought would be, I think you're going to run into an issue with taking out some of that pavement. And so that's something that'll have to be discussed with staff on whether you actually create a green space in there. So those would be my thoughts relative to trying to help this work with the neighborhood a little bit better.
Mr. Clark, are you willing to agree to that?
Can you state the condition of the requirement?
I think it's just twofold. One would be a condition related to the architectural treatments that you come up with would be, they're going to be approved by staff. And this is done on other projects where you're just looking for something that's compatible. Then the second would be is wherever it does match up to an adjacent residence, is any landscape buffering requirement would be increased by 1/2, so 1.5 times.
Mr. Foster, I think on the design element, if you want staff to approve the design, you're going to have to give them some parameters. They can't just arbitrarily say yes or no without some direction from the commission. Is that fairly stated?
If you go back to a lot of the wording we've approved on the CUPs, it speaks directly to compatibility of materials and architectural treatment. So I think it's as simple as that.
To the neighborhood, or?
I mean, the issue there is typically on a community unit plan, it's whatever the first building is has to comply with those standards. There's no first building here other than what's there. And if we're not happy with that, we need some sort of guidance, because I'm going to tell you, I'm ready now, after all the grief I've gotten over Central and Vassar, that instead of staff approving architectural stuff, we bring it back here and have you guys approve it. I cannot explain how much grief I've gotten over the building that got approved by council. So
I'm a believer in site plan review, and I frankly think whether it's the planning commission, whether it's a subcommittee, to take that load off of staff, I think would be very wise.
I can address the first question if that would be helpful about landscaping. Again, along Broadway, we're limited in that we're essentially the parking lot already encroaches, so there's little green space actually on our lot. With that said, if the city was willing to allow something to be done there, I certainly wouldn't refute that. On the rear of the building along the east property line, there is currently a fence separating what's shown there as a dirt alleyway almost immediately behind the building. So it is screened by a wood fence there. With that said, to the north where you'll see the text that calls out a new concrete driveway there, there is space that's currently all just turf area where some additional landscaping could be located in that area. To the south of the building, shown up very faintly on this plan, but that's where the trash enclosure is. It's currently paved all the way up to the south lot line, and south of us is a motel. So the only residential is behind us to the east.
I think it'd be appropriate, since staff is recommending denial, that we ask for a little bit more in the submission. We can either approve it, it's contingent upon us seeing something else, or we can ask them to bring it back with a presentation at a later date before we approve it. What would be?
Going on what the applicant has said and what we've talked about here, one thing about bringing it back to this body for approval, well, how many people sitting on this would even know how to go about doing it, number one, because his idea and my idea and Don's idea are probably going to be different. That's a problem. The second thing is, I think the applicant has said that he would make the building nice and come up with some landscaping. So under that situation, defer it, have him bring it back to us, and instead of saying, well, we can do this, we can do that, just have him show it to us, and at that point in time, we can just say yea or nay. Plain and simple. Because there's no way with 14 people can agree on a design for anything as far as that goes.
So I know you're not making a motion right now, but if you were making one, what would you say?
Is that a motion? Motion that we defer and have the concerns that this commission has, have the applicant address those and bring it back to us in 2 weeks.
Do we have a second?
Whatever time they need to do it. Because he said he's not opposed to that. He already sounds like he knows what needs to be done. Just show it to us.
We have a second that motion?
Second that.
Mr. Klausmeyer? I know. Mr. McKay made the motion, Mr. Klausmeyer seconded, and now we'll have discussion.
I guess the only thing I would change is I would approve it with the understanding that we are going to get to see something to final approve it. So we're just looking at either an architectural plan or a building plan that everybody thinks is improved. And hopefully in that same time, they can work with the neighborhood and get them to buy off on it. And all of a sudden, there's nobody opposed to it. I think everybody wins.
Is that a substitute motion?
We have one other piece of information here. goes before the DAB on February 7th, and I know Mr. McKay will be happy to hear that. So that'd give us,
Be there.
that'd give us time to
I'm
hear.
gonna do like Dale, I'm taking the 5th.
Ms. Miles.
I just want to make a comment. So I'm from the south side of Wichita, and I think what really bothers me about this is that, we looked at making future land uses and least desirable land uses. And what concerns me is that this falls in a least desirable use for that area. And I know as we work to change the south side of Wichita, if we continue to put bars and used car lots and those types of things in south side of Wichita in every vacant building that comes up along the way, as opposed to looking for other uses for that property. And I know that Quick Trip makes it really difficult, but there still are a lot of other uses that property could be used for. And if we continue to just put the same things in there, we will never be able to redirect the south side of Wichita into something better than what it is today. So for that reason, I would not support approving against the recommendation of staff. Thank you.
Mr. Johnson.
Does anybody have any idea how many bars there are between Kellogg and MacArthur on Broadway?
I'm just using that as an example.
I'm just looking for facts. I don't know of a lot of bars that are there. There's a ton of car lots. Now, there's some car lots that sell a little higher end cars, but they keep their place nice, and there's some that I don't even know if they run. And I know everybody needs different types of car, but somebody to buy a house and put some cars in front versus paying for a piece of property like this and making a car lot, I think they're drastically different, and that's the only reason I'm supporting.
Mr. Blick?
I was really tossed at the very beginning because I feel for the property owner because he just purchased a brand new property. On the other hand, I understand he purchased that property knowing these restrictions were there. Quick Trip's not the only one. Walmart does this also, and they're closing Walmarts, and they're doing the same thing. On the other hand, I see the Neighborhood Association and Business Association that has done the steps necessary, has went to city council, has spent years doing this, and they said they do not want these things. They're trying to clean up the area, and they put a plan in place, and that plan is before us. And so I would definitely take staff's recommendation on this because they've put the effort, they put the plan in. And as a Southsider also, and as a president of the Neighborhood Association, I know how much hard work it is if you're trying to go and put a plan together and get the recommendation. And so I commend them for at least showing up today and doing what's needed, so.
I'd like to ask the applicant if you have looked at the viability of other options for the building in here that says, the most desirable, like medical office or professional, maybe an office building or something like that. Have you looked into something like that?
The applicant is actually here today. He's the property owner. Is he allowed to come up and speak? He would be much more qualified to answer that question than I would.
The property owner, that'd be fine.
Yeah.
Go ahead and ask your question after he
Hamid Bakhtiari, 1522 Coolidge. The only real interest I've got in it is the yellow and red. I forget what it is, the payday loan. It wasn't a pawn shop. It was for a payday loan, which I just didn't want to put a payday loan there. I thought there's a lot better uses for that property. It's a really nice, clean property. It's less than 20 years old. I think it was built in '99. It's a really solid property, and it just fits to do the car lot. It looks really nice. I have a lot of businesses on the south side too. I own Mobilecom. It's a cell phone repair shop. We're at Pawnee and Broadway. I have Metro PCS, and I had looked at doing that before, but there's different dealers in town, and I do not have the access to go put a cell phone store in that lot because we're already so damn saturated with cell phone stores on that side of town as well. So we have a mile separation, so that was my initial plan, and that's what I was going to use it for. And I was going to get around all the deed restrictions, but now I'm stuck with payday loan or car lot. And that's,
You haven't checked the viability of an office building or something?
I've had it for lease for over a year, so.
Okay, all right, thank
So
you.
there has payday loan and car lot is all the only interest we've got. I was originally going to use it myself, but just our partners changed. We got involved with Metro PCS and they put one at Harry in Broadway, which is a different dealer. So I'd violate their 1 mile separation by going there, so.
Mr. Warren.
The desire for a better quality commercial is real, but businesses don't want to go there. I mean, we can want something nicer all day long, and we can say we're going to wait for that, and we'll wait till the cows come in, because this is an area that at this stage, with the restrictions that are on there, I think that the best we can do is try to dress this thing up as nice as we can. Try to make, unfortunately, a better looking parking lot is, I think, the best that we can ask for.
We have a motion and a second.
One thing too, I'd like to add, another thing, if we do create.
Excuse
just-
me?
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
Unless somebody asks you a question, we can't
Okay.
allow it. Anybody want to ask a question? Seeing none, we have a motion and a second. You want to restate the motion?
My motion was to defer for either 2 weeks or whatever period of time.
How much time, Mr. Clark, would you and the owner decide that you would need?
I guess it depends what you're asking for. Are you looking for a site plan and building elevations, perhaps?
Mainly,
Mainly?
and a landscape type plan,
Yeah, I think 2 weeks would be appropriate.
2 weeks in.
And who had the second? Mr., is that okay with you? Okay, so we have a motion and a second, and we still have time to ask questions, discussion. I attempted not to do that, but I have to. Mr. Foster.
Just a question related to who gets a look at this and the process for that. Not that the subdivision committee has a lot of extra time, but that might be one venue if you didn't want to establish a new committee. But then you still have the broad question whether there ought to be any public or neighborhood involvement in that look at the site plan. But I'm just going to throw that out there. I don't know that affects our vote now.
Mr. Miller just pointed out to me that by doing this 2 weeks from now, you only have a week because it has to be submitted a week ahead of time.
That would still be okay.
So I assume you have something now that you're,
Yeah, there are ideas that have already been floated out there and presented between myself and the client.
I'd like to make a substitute motion for staff's recommendation to denial.
Second.
okay. Any discussion on a substitute motion? Seeing none, we'll take up the substitute motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Aye. So it fails 9-2? 2-9, yeah. So we're back to the original motion. All in favor of the motion, as stated by Mr. McKay and seconded by Mr. Klausmeyer, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
So we have 9-2 in favor of the motion. Is that correct? With Mr. Blick and Ms. Miles dissenting. Anybody else said no? Okay, so it passes, and we'll see you back here in 2 weeks. Thank you. Okay, I think the next one, number 8, was the one that you had a question about.
Mr. Foster?
Do we want to take about a 5-minute break? I'm the only one that needs to get up and go.
Make a motion.
No, I don't care. Because I will.
I would say we're going to take a 5-minute break and come back here at 25 after 4. They locked the building at 5, so we got to be out of here, man.
Ask a question for other guys, I'll have one.
I know. We got push marks.